So at games industry events since August, Gamergate's felt like Voldemort, a kind of omnipresence that shall not be named. When Sarah and I were putting together this panel, we decided it was pointless to talk around the name and build this panel as such. I will be upfront with my questions, as this is a difficult topic, and I don't think we necessarily benefit from vagueness or euphemism. AAA at large has been reticent to comment at all, and while putting this panel together, Sarah and I got frustrated as various PR reps refused participation on behalf of potential panelists. It was especially disappointing as this is ultimately a panel about personal experiences. I'm not asking anyone to take a stand, just to speak honestly about their experience in development and the kind of conversations they have regarding inclusivity and diversity and the like while developing games. So without further ado, I want to offer first my deepest gratitude to our panel and allow them to introduce themselves. David?
Hi, my name is David Gaider. I've been lead writer on a number of projects at BioWare, Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic, Neverwinter Nights, most recently the Dragon Age series, which I just recently moved on to a new project, which hasn't been named yet. Yeah, and we deal with issues of diversity a lot, so this seemed like an appropriate place to come.
I'm Kate Welch. I am a UI designer and web designer. Most recently, my AAA experience, I was at ArenaNet working on Guild Wars 2 for about 4 years. And now I'm a freelancer. I do work for Double Fine and some other smaller studios around the country.
Great. So the first question is, have you experienced a shift in your own awareness around issues of inclusivity or representation over the last year as these conversations have been increasingly prevalent? Has that changed your relationship to your work? And have you had conversations about inclusivity representation in conceptualizing your game? Is there any change in awareness across your team in small or large degrees?
I would say that yes, but it's something BioWare has had to do increasingly, I think in large part because romances come up quite a bit in the games we make. It's not true for all games, but for us, the fact that we have romances means that, I say it means, but it's something that we didn't start off really thinking about very much, and I think that's a large part of the difficulty in that it's not so much that people are doing things on purpose at large studios or really any studio. Like they're trying to be purposefully obtuse. I think it's just sometimes the conversation just doesn't occur, and it didn't occur for a long time at BioWare either. Until we start to realize that, the types of romances that we allow sort of are a very clear signal to the people playing the game as to who we think our audience actually is. And you could end up feeling very excluded if you weren't part of that group. And to everybody else, of course, it's invisible. Like, why wouldn't you have every romance be straight, for instance? And so when the conversation started to come up, I think at first it induced a lot of eye rolling and so forth. Not because people didn't think that was worthwhile. It just the idea of opening the can of worms, like, oh God, do we really want to deal with this? The inevitable fallout, which in many cases is sadly true. There's absolutely fallout after every single thing that we do, but. I'd say over time there's been a lot more willingness that yes, if no single developer steps forward and starts doing these things, then it's never going to not be a big issue. So why not?
It seems like too when you discuss the idea of fallout, it's important for someone to lead that charge for one thing, but also to have it so that conversation comes up so often that you don't have that eye rolling. You had an excellent term for it earlier.
Compassion fatigue.
Yeah. So you have these people who are just exhausted by the idea. The mere concept of like, oh my gosh, if we put a person of color into our game, there's going to be people who are angry at us. There are going to be people who wonder why we didn't put more. And to have to deal with that fallout, it's just not worth it. Let's just make it a straight white guy, because then we don't have to deal with that kind of fallout. But to have so many people who are pushing for that and making it a normal conversation, you eventually the eye rolling muscles are just going to get worn out. Like you're going to get tired, and so and I think that's honestly, it's that persistence and that feeling of like, we push for this regularly, this is a normal thing that we do, to the point where it's just like, okay, yeah, of course, let's do that.
Do you feel there's a burden of education at all as you're trying to bring up particular issues, or do you feel like you have bared that burden at all?
I don't know if I would call it a burden necessarily. I think that it's we were talking earlier about how you guys both worry that sometimes you're that guy in the room, the one who's like, I want a more diverse cast. I want to include people of color, of alternate sexuality, and to have that reputation is kind of like, do you feel like people ignore you? But I think it's really important to carry that burden, as you say, like to educate people, to make them understand why it's important, and that like more people need to be that guy.
I think that being that guy, like I did bring that up, and I think it is a lot of time it's a self-imposed thing, as opposed to that you would actually be ostracized, as you're worried about, oh, am I always bringing this up? Am I the guy with the issue? But I mean, one comment I get a lot online from people is like, well, why don't creators just leave them free to create, and why must they be restrained? And it's like, it's not a restraint. It's not that this is our job. It's not the thing especially when you're working on such a huge game. It's not your highest priority, because I mean, it's hard enough for a large game company just to stay afloat these days. But you have to allow for that conversation to occur. It's just a conversation, and most of the time, the vast majority of the time, the people you're talking to are going to be like, oh, that actually makes sense. I didn't even think, because the default is invisible. You don't have to explain why a guy is a guy, a male character, or a white character. That it just flies and nobody ever thinks about it. They think about everything else they is. As soon as you say they're black or they're gay or anything else, suddenly it's like, well, why? We have to explain to the audience why. No, you don't. No, you really don't. But it as long as that conversation occurs, and then sometimes it's just like, well, that makes it more creative. So when someone says to me, why do you allow creators to create? That's it. That's what we're doing. Yeah. This allows us to make a wider array of characters. Sometimes you make a character that you add some different element to them, and suddenly it's like, oh, I didn't think of that. And suddenly it opens up all these other possibilities of things you could talk about, or what kind of stories you can have. And
it's so joyful to have that conversation too, for the most part. I think even if you are that guy, there's always going to be someone in the room who'd be like, oh, this totally could be a female character. This guy could be gay. Like that's great. And you get to expand the bounds of your creativity that way, and express things. And it doesn't always have to be like the people are like, well, you're just doing this to be different or to make a splash. Like, no, it's because this is a representation of how the world is, and it should be. Games are so important, and they're so reflective of culture. They have to reflect the world.
I would say, as time passes, I've noticed that kind of the conversation occurring from amongst a lot more people at the studio than did previously. Often from people I would never have expected it from, as opposed, you'll get concept art floating across your desk that you never even asked for, and suddenly it's more diverse characters, for instance, and it's like, oh, I didn't even have to ask, or they have suggestions on that front as well, and I think that's happening more and more as time goes on.
Is the makeup of the development team becoming more diverse? I think it's often said that the way that we can make more and more diverse representation, the way that we can bring life to that, is by having more and more diverse development teams. Have you seen your team's makeup, and how would you compare that to the diversity that's represented in your games?
I'd say the teams are probably less diverse than the games. And I don't know that that's changing. I know that at least BioWare and probably EA at large are trying to change that. But part of it is getting more people, a wider variety of people to apply for the jobs as well. And I mean, I think part of it's culture, part of it is team culture as well, I think. I mean, I think they're probably, you're right, we do have to have a wider diversity in the team and in the industry as a whole. And I think it's just a larger question of how does the industry do that? How do we encourage that?
Yeah, I think it's also, it can be sort of circular too. If you have a team that's not necessarily diverse, but they're adding diverse representations of people in your work, then it's possible that those people will see that in your work and feel included, and then pursue a career in the game industry. Like you even by making those changes, you're actually actively changing the diversity of the industry itself.
How do you stay abreast of what contemporary issues exist around representation, around issues of being properly inclusive, as progressivism tends to be a bit of something that's moving forward, right?
Yeah, it is kind of a moving target. I guess I learn from, if we're being totally honest, I've learned from the missteps of others, unfortunately. But I think that's kind of what Tumblr and Twitter have been. So they're always very vocal about the way that diversity should be represented and how it should change. And I learn about it through, honestly, not to like suck up or anything, but I learn about it through games like Dragon Age Inquisition. I learn about how people are being included in these games. And like, if BioWare is doing this, if a AAA, a gigantic blockbuster game is able to offer me a character who's a trans woman, like, that's awesome. Like, I don't know, it's making a difference. It's a big deal.
I look forward to the day when we can talk about those kind of characters and not have it be the big deal that it seems to turn into. I had a character named Dorian. Thank you. I had a character named Dorian that, for all our big follower characters in DAI, when we were announcing them and we were going through an interview where we talked about all their elements. And Dorian, there's this interview where I talked about he's a magister and sort of rebel against his own country and blah, blah, blah. And then that last question, it was so is there anything particular about this character that you were proud of? And I said, well, yeah, he's gay. And he's the first gay character that I've ever had a chance to write. I'm gay, and I felt very personally connected to it. And the reaction from a lot of people was like, it was like we held a press conference to announce solely the fact that he was gay. Well, why did you write a character that the whole thing about him was that he was gay? I didn't. So I do look forward to that not being such a big issue, but as far as staying abreast of issues, we just sort of, it's through unrelenting criticism. I mean, from both sides. I mean, you have the ones who are just like, it seems like any single thing you do is too much. People saying, oh, that's all the games media does is talk about inclusivity, and I think they did an actual analysis, and it was less than 1% of articles about games that were actually about that. It's just like observational bias much, and then there's the other side as well. There's the people that will, as soon as you do anything, it seems they want to sort of criticize you based on, did you say it right? Did you do enough? If you did some, why didn't you do more? If you do more, why didn't you do even more? So it's like trying to find a balance between that and not, and realizing that you can do better. Everybody can do better. BioWare can do better. The rest of the industry can do better, and ensuring that you have that conversation regardless of the environment that you're in. I mean, I feel for indie developers especially because they don't have the buffer that we do as a big company. I mean, we can, at the end of the day, we're protected and they're not, and so I think they're far braver than we are.
Yeah, we were talking about that buffer earlier too. There's a certain support structure that I think AAA lends itself to, which is that whether it's real or not, imagined or not, you have these HR and PR departments who can be there at your back if you are someone who is targeted by Gamergate or whatever, and especially when it's just because you're a woman and you get targeted. It's a very different experience between being a member of a AAA company and being an indie developer, because when you're indie, you're an easy-seeming target. There's no one there who's going to bite back except for one person, and it's so much easier to shout that person down. So the logical conclusion that I've come to, of course, is that indie developers just need to have like a AAA level entity around them, and I don't know how that works. I don't know what it is. I just want, this is my message, is that indie developers need to rally and form an army. Thank you.
So if indie developers can sort of have this, they're exposed to a degree, right? They have full ownership of the thing that they're making. They have full creative control of the thing that they're making. But in the context of being that guy, right, of being the one person fighting for something, fighting for a progressive viewpoint in a room, how do you take the next step with that? How do you form a coalition, maximize your impact on a given game team? What are the strategies that you've used when you've seen work happening on teams that you've been part of that you don't think is correct or you disapprove of? How do you advocate?
It's hard.
Yeah, I guess it's hard because it's like I don't feel like I'm fighting against anything. Okay. I don't feel like, when I say that guy, I did mean that it's something I sort of, I'm Canadian, so if I have an opinion, I have to apologize for it. But I mean, everybody I work with, they're wonderful people. They're liberal. They're smart and they're educated. So I think a lot of times the mistakes they make are mistakes that they make on behalf of people. Mm-hmm. Oh, there are people out there, the audience, that won't find this acceptable, but I find it acceptable. I think it's great, but no, they never will. So we won't do that. I think that's thing that happens a lot of time. Or conversely, they just don't. They never considered the idea, and that's the thing I said is slowly changing because now it's not a surprise, and now that there are more and more games that are doing stuff. Naughty Dog, for instance, and I can't even think of it anymore off the top of my head, but there are other games that are just including this and are going, sort of putting ourselves before the firing squad to get that desensitization.
You can do it. Third time's a charm.
Desensitization.
Woo!
Get that out of the way, and then we can get on to the business of actually having more diverse characters just as a matter of rote. I think now that that's being done, you get less of that, oh, I never thought of that. Really? What rock have you been living under? Right. I think that's an actual response you can give these days.
I think that despite, I don't know what most people's opinions are of all of the feminist frequency videos. I generally, speaking, I adore them. And I can't tell you how many people who I've talked to have been like, I watched this video and it totally changed how I thought about things. Like white male AAA developers who are like, I had no idea that this was even a thing. This is so great to learn about. And I think that's at least half of the feedback that comes out of those videos is like, I've learned so much, and I had no idea, and it's gonna change the way I think about things. And the other half is like, why are you trying to take my boobs away? And that's like, I kind of wish that those people would understand, like, they're not going anywhere. You're gonna have boobs and white men in your video games forever. Just let us also have some other stuff sometimes.
Yeah, just to speak about the feminist frequency videos as well, speaking from the standpoint of somebody in a AAA studio where I know a lot of people who work there have seen it, I don't know what the guys who complain about the videos, what they think happens. That people at a AAA studio are going to watch the videos and go, oh my God, we can't do any of these things ever, and we never will as soon as we see the video. In what universe is that going to happen? You're going to have the boobs. Yeah. It's going to happen. We were in no danger of boobs going extinct in games. But you can watch something like that, and you can see its critique, and just makes you stop and think, some of those are good criticisms. Maybe when we're looking at adding content in, that's something we should keep in mind. Sometimes we can justify the content we're doing because we have other things in the game that are, have representation or good depictions. I think at its core, the critique is, shouldn't there be a broader diversity? Maybe shouldn't you think about the message that you're giving in your game? Sometimes it's like, yes, that is the message we're doing, and we've thought about it, and we can justify it. I think it's unthinking, doing it unthinkingly, that I think Anita is fighting against. And is that such a revolutionary concept? I don't think so.
I don't think so.
Why do you think it is that games tend to be so sensitive to these types of critiques? I think oftentimes when you part of the reason that conversations tend to be difficult tends to be that as the conversations happen and as criticism happens, there tends to be big responses either by PR or what have you to review scores, etc. It seems like games in general doesn't seem to deal as well with a varied set of criticisms as some other media do.
What do you mean? Sorry.
Yes, it's a little, sorry, it's a slightly misoriented question. I guess what I'm trying to look at is just sort of the general sensitivity of people on various game teams to these types of external critiques. Do people ever take it personally? Does it?
You mean the volatility of the reactions?
Yeah.
It's on a, in either direction. Nobody ever says, "Oh, I'm slightly opposed to that." I don't think that's a good idea. It has to be, a screaming fit rage and mad rants on Twitter, on Tumblr, what have you. Why? I don't know. Because they can? Because it's the internet? I don't think that's a good justification. Because when it comes to games, I think it's just, and there's a lot of reaction going on. I think that for a long time, games, they say, "Oh, games used to be just games, and now it's about social justice." Cue Batman. It's like and I think that it goes back to the default being invisible. Well, yeah, for a long time, games, the default was all you have, so it was invisible. And now there's these introduction of maybe we should think about what our games say to women, to a broader audience. What somebody who isn't part of the traditional demographic, what they feel like playing our game. And not just, maybe they're not going to play our game. Maybe we make a game that we don't think, say, women are going to play at all. What does our game encourage our male players to think about women? We are in part responsible for the culture that engenders. And it doesn't mean we drop everything and never touch the subject ever again, or have everybody clothed up to the neck, but it does mean stop and think about it and think about what we're saying.
So where do you see issues of representation, diversity, inclusivity headed in your work, in the industry, and in AAA games more broadly? Are there presently underrepresented groups or issues that you'd personally like to see more light brought to? Are there process changes or attitudinal shifts that you think AAA needs to go through or is presently undergoing?
I personally, sometimes I think of this particular point in our history as being one of those ships in the Arctic that's like cutting through the ice, so like the icebreaker, the really sharp point, and it's met with so much resistance. Obviously, it's going through this solid object, but eventually that ice is going to break because that's what the ship does. And so in that sense, I think that the future, the way that things are going in this industry, is going to be on the side of like the people who are favoring diversity. It's just going to happen. To me, it seems like an inevitability. That's just the way things are going. To be people who are resisting the idea of seeing other representations of humanity in their video games is to be on the side of history that will be ignored. I believe that very strongly.
Do you see a single games culture moving forward? Do you see multiple games cultures moving forward? If there's a notion of a Gamergate, I think it tends to indicate that there's a notion of some sort of singular games culture.
It seems that there are people out there that seem to fear that we're going to start making games that are about diversity. And I'm talking AAA games, so it's like I don't think that has happened, will happen.
I'd love to play a game about diversity. It sounds interesting.
I mean, sure, I'm not saying there can't be games that are specifically about diversity, but the idea that including diversity in a game makes it about diversity, that's the entirety of what it's about. And I don't think that it's something that will happen, but I think moving forward, that just having more of it will just stop singling it out and react less to it. And so I think that it just sort of will absorb into the culture that already exists, and it won't be the big deal that it is. I'd like to announce a character like Dory and go through all the questions, say, "Oh yeah, I was proud of him. He's a gay character. He's the first one I've gotten to write." And everybody just goes, "Okay, so he's a magister. I'd like to get to that point. And then I think the culture as a whole can grow up a little. It's like sort of the film industry maturing and sort of being able to embrace a larger variety of topics because it doesn't assume that all the audience will accept is something that is for children.
There was I was on a panel at Emerald City Comic Con a few years back, and there was another guy on the panel. He was making all these points. There were terrific points about diversity in comics, and particularly the public reaction to Spider-Man being black, and how just like there was this outcry, you may remember, and I turned to him during this conversation, and I asked him, how do you, as a creator, how do you make it so people don't freak out when you make Spider-Man black or whatever? How do you make it so people don't lose their minds when they see diversity in their comics and their games? And his immediate response was, just put more diversity in. That's all you got to do. Like it takes time, but the only thing that you can do to fix it is to just make things more diverse, more inclusive, and eventually the shouting dies down. I think that's such good advice.
It's tough. It's a tough one, right?
Guys, it's tough times.
It's a tough one, right? Like,
It's tough.
is there a way to fix the problems faster? Is there a way to accelerate this type of change? Like, are we undergoing an accelerated change?
I think it feels interminable at the moment. It's this particular wave. I've talked to a lot of people in the industry, and stuff like this happens, and it has happened over the years, but it's usually gone. It's like it's a surge, and then within a month it's died down, and people have moved on to something else. So the fact that we're still talking about Gamergate is, to me, kind of amazing. And so it feels like it has lasted for so long. So it right now feels like it's a struggle, and I think that it's just something that we'll have to pull through. But no, I think that it's a fight, and you have to struggle through it. I don't think that there's a shortcut or a turbo button or anything like that, unfortunately.
Do you think that any of the decisions that you've made around Dragon Age have impacted sales, have impacted any of it from a positive or negative standpoint?
Does it have impacted sales?
Impacted sales, impacted perception, impacted who is playing the game?
That's a bit of a crystal ball question, right?
Yeah.
I mean, Dragon Age Inquisition went out. It had a pretty diverse cast, probably the most diverse one we've had so far. Without that diversity, might it have sold more? Might it have sold less? I don't really know. But
do you think you're by having more diverse representation, you're reaching a more diverse audience?
I would think so. The game sold really well as far as I've heard. So somebody saying, "Oh my God, you do that and nobody will buy it," did not pan out, guys. that forecast not true. So.
I think definitely the same has been the case across, like, things Marvel Comics has been doing with representing having a broader diversity, introducing characters like the new Miss Marvel. They see great sales.
One of their top-selling comics.
Yeah, exactly.
If not the top-selling. I don't know which it is, but
Yeah.
Just put it out there and realize that didn't have the doom and gloom forecast impact on sales that everybody predicted. Maybe at its core, the larger audience just doesn't care. Maybe they just want a good game that has some interesting characters in it. Maybe at the end of the day, that's all that really matters.
I remember right around the time that I quit, there was a character that was introduced into Guild Wars 2 that was, we had a variety. For the record, Guild Wars 2 was amazing about inclusivity, and the writers got a lot of leeway to make a lot of great choices. It is a fantasy MMO, so there's quite a few boobs, if that's what you're looking for. But as far as like character representation, we had this character that was added in, who was a little version of an Asura, like a baby Asura. But she wasn't baby; she was just young. But she's physically disabled. And she got to ride around in this awesome robot golem, and it was our first major canonical character that had a physical disability. And I remember reading all of these reactions from people who are like, I'm in a wheelchair, and it is so cool to see this character who is also attached to this robot, but she's so powerful, and like all these like young women who are like, she's my hero, I love Timey, she's so awesome. Like that makes it worth it. That makes the struggle worth it by itself.
Yeah, if I could have 100 people scream at me that you know, they didn't like whatever. And at the end of the day, if I even have one person, and I had way more than one, you know, find a way to contact me personally and tell me that a character like Dorian or Sarah or you know, our game in general sort of let them come out to their parents. And it was a positive experience, and they sort of had felt suicidal before, and it kind of saved them, and they felt needed to thank me personally. I get one thing like that's as a creator personally, that's all I need.
I think that's a great place to stop. Thank you both so much.